people in this country and the way it's dealt with in our judicial system. So I want to thank you for being here tonight. Thandi and I were comrades in the Malcolm X grassroots movement and the New African People's Organization in Birmingham, Alabama, dealing with POPO and everything.
Y'all was in Birmingham doing NAPO stuff?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. Chokwe was one of our mentors. And so we've come a long way. And so I want to thank you for writing this very important book, No Doubt. About Oscar Grant. We would like very much for you to talk to us about, what happened with Oscar Grant, to give a humane perspective of this young man's life and how he was handled in the judicial.
Okay, well, thank you, sister. Again, thank y'all for coming out. I appreciate being able to sit and talk with folks from Detroit. Instead of being, stuck in a room somewhere or in a courtroom. So I'm anxious to, as I talk with y'all about Oscar, I'm anxious to dialogue with y'all about Detroit and Renisha and this trial and other stuff. But, if you saw the movie Fruitvale, Oscar was a young brother, 22 years old. He was out with his friends, out with his fiance, New Year's Eve night, and was on a subway train. There was a call of a fight on a train. The police were called and the train was stopped. Oscar and his friends were pulled off the train, and one of the officers was brutalizing one of Oscar's friends, and because they objected to that, the officer then turned his wrath towards Oscar and his other friends. In particular, a decision was made to arrest Oscar. The brutalization continued. They were trying to handcuff him. They had him on the ground. They couldn't get his arm because they had pinned Oscar on top of his arm. One cop by the name of Johannes Mesler said, "I'm going to tase him," but instead of pulling out his taser, he pulled out his gun. That's what he said he was going to tase him. He ends up shooting Oscar in the back. Now this is New Year's Eve. It's hundreds, if not thousands of people who witnessed this and also had their cameras and their cell phones, and they were videotaping it at the time it happened. And the next morning, the news talked about a young man who was killed. Of course, the news got the story wrong. So, and the family had been notified, the night before. Oscar's been shot. He's at the hospital. They had a vigil at the hospital. He died the next morning. So by noon, they had contacted an attorney. So the news is reporting the story wrong. People start calling the news station. They start calling the reporter, saying, "Nah, that's not what happened. Here's my video." And so some people even put it on YouTube, and that's how the rest of the world found out about it and was able to actually watch this young brother being executed before their very eyes. It took, I think, 13 days, about 13 days, 2 weeks, for the cop who did it to be charged with murder, and he had already fled to Nevada. Now he says he left because his family was getting death threats, but he fled the state. He was arrested, he was brought back, he was arraigned, given a high bail, and we eventually had the trial. His attorney argued that because the case had received so much publicity, we can't have it in Alameda County in Oakland, we have to move it. It ended up being in Los Angeles. No black folks on the jury whatsoever. He was charged with second-degree murder. They took first degree off the table. He was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and a gun enhancement charge, which means gun in the use of a felony. The judge threw that charge out, sentenced him to the low end of involuntary manslaughter, 2 years in prison. In California, involuntary manslaughter is a non-violent felony. If you have a non-violent felony, for every 1 day you serve in jail or prison, you get 1 day good time. So he's sentenced to 2 years in prison, walks out after 1 year in jail. Now, his friends had lawsuits. His mother, his fiance, they had lawsuits. His father, who was incarcerated, had a lawsuit. So from that time, January 1st, 2009 through now, the story has continued because of these lawsuits, because of this cop trying to get his record expunged and name cleared and go back to being a cop. And then a young brother by the name of Ryan Coogler said, "I'm going to do a movie on this." And he started to call it Fruitvale, but the name was changed to Fruitvale Station, and that's the movie most of us have seen, which was a very pretty poignant film. he wanted to focus on Oscar, the last day of Oscar's life, that New Year's Day. He didn't want to focus on the movement that rose up after. He didn't want to focus on, a large biographical, just that one particular day and what happened. And a lot of people were critical of that, but I still think that it did good work.
Yeah, it did.
It did a needed, necessary work. And part of the criticism is, well, we knew he was human. This is for white folks. I disagree, not necessarily. I think that we need to be reminded.
That's right.
That's right.
We need to be reminded, but we also need to be, it needs to be amplified.
I agree.
Our own humanity needs to be amplified for ourselves, not necessarily for other people. So, But so that was Fruitvale Station. The last of his friends, 5 of his friends who were on the platform with him, settled their lawsuit a couple of months ago. His father's lawsuit went to trial. It was rejected by the jury. He's appealing it, but the story of Oscar Grant is quote unquote beginning to come to an end legally. But my position is, as long as people continue to promote myths and lies about Oscar Grant, and as long as the police are able to get away with impunity for murdering black people, the story of Oscar Grant will never end.
What are some things about this case that, or Oscar himself, that has not come out that you have done your research?
Actually, in I think it's chapter 2 of the book, I call chapter 1 Truth and Damn Truths, because I wanted to use the word damn lie. Chapter 2 is called Lies and Damn Lies, and it's talking about the lies that have been told on Oscar Grant. These were the lies that were told in court and then repeated in the media to justify the treatment of him and blame him for his own death. And so I call it the murders of Oscar Grant, because he was murdered by Johannes Mesley for the first time, then he was murdered in the courts, and then he was murdered in the media. The same way that Renisha McBride was murdered in the courts.
That's right.
I came here to cover that trial. I worked in partnership with Color of Change. I live tweeted from the trial daily, wrote my reports, Black Agenda reporters carried them. And when I talk about the level of sliminess, of viciousness and just vile white supremacy that spewed forth from that attorney on Renisha, I needed to go home and shower every day. It's murder. It's unjustifiably killing someone. And that's what they did in that courtroom. That's what that attorney did to get her client, Ted Wafer, off the hook. It didn't work, as you all know. But yeah, so these lies that are told that Oscar Grant is resisting arrest. In California, the penal code says that it's called 148, delaying, obstructing, or resisting arrest. And that's one of the ways they always get us, but we always hear resisting arrest. And for me, when I think of resisting arrest, it's like, get the hell off of me, and you trying to run and flee the scene. Resisting arrest would be something just as you pulling away from me and I grab you. That's resisting arrest. Yeah, throwing your ID. You're delaying them in the performance of their duty, or you're obstructing them in the performance of their duty. So that's not what happened with Oscar Grant. They created a situation where they had decided to handcuff him. Oscar had put his hands behind his back voluntarily, even though he didn't agree with the decision to be arrested. The cop behind him, Johannes Mesley, acting on cue from his partner, who's standing in front of Oscar and verbally assaulting him with a racist slur, tries to slam Oscar face first into the ground. That's when Oscar takes his hand out to break his fall. So they fall on top of him, and they end up on top of Oscar trying to pull his hand out. So the cop says, well, I'm going to tase him, but he also says something else. I don't know how y'all feel about cuss words in front of babies.
It's what was said. Go ahead.
So he claims, and one of his partners said he heard the officer say, I'm going to tase him. But what his friend didn't say, but what Oscar Grant's friend said, he heard the cop say, fuck this. Because he's tugging at this weapon and it's not coming. Or he's tugging at the wrong weapon and he no longer gives a damn. Because when you look at the video in slow motion, you can see he's tugging at this weapon, and then he does like this and looks at it. He eventually gets the weapon together, stands up, fires one shot in Oscar's back. So what we surmised is that, by the time he's able to get up off Oscar can put his hand back, which we see him do, and his hand is empty. So the guy was saying, well, I thought he was going for a gun. So the fact that he saw this empty hand and no gun in Oscar's hand that's when he does like, they tried to make it, they were just like Wafer's attorney was insisting on this lie of, oh, she's trying to break into Wafer's house because she's a drug dealer up to no good. So they want to force that white supremacist lie down the public's throat. In California, they decided to force the lie down our throat. Well, he meant to tase him.
Yeah.
He meant to tase him. And see, can't you see that the reason why he looked shocked is because he realized he shot him. Nah, he wanted to shoot him. So, I mean,
So you kind of reference a little bit to Oscar or Rashida. Can you go to
Renisha?
Any details more, the comparisons between the two cases?
Well, the comparison is, number one, the victim is made, first of all, the victim is not a victim. It's their own fault. Number two, the victim is made to be an aggressor.
That's right. They
kept talking. Now, Renisha McBride, they said she was 5 foot 4 inches tall, 180 pounds. I don't know what I ain't seen 180 pounds in years, as y'all can tell. I'm not sure what that looked like on a 5'4", 180 pounds. But they were trying to say that even though she's had a concussion, was high, was drunk, she still had sufficient strength to be banging on Wafer's door so that it rattled the windows and vibrated the floor, and he felt that the door was just going to cave in. She tried to argue, well, Renisha McBride has this aggressive side we don't know about. So I want to enter into evidence profiles from her social media, which the judge denied, but every chance the attorney got, she brought it up about these social media profiles just to poison the jury. So the victim is seen as not a victim, i.e. not deserving of sympathy or empathy. It's their own fault. They get blamed for it. Number two, they're seen as an aggressor. Number three, it's never the perpetrator's fault. The perpetrator in white supremacist violence, whether it's cops,
they're the norm, the law abiders.
Zimmerman, or I did nothing wrong.
Right.
It's everybody's fault except, even Wafer said on the stand, if the EMS had just come, if she had just waited, if the EMS had come before Renisha McBride had left the crash site,
I wouldn't be here.
She'd still be alive. No, if you hadn't blown her face off, she'd still be alive. That's just, how many was that, 3, 4? I lost track. The other thing is that the media is complicit when the victim is black, particularly when the victim's black and the perpetrator is white. Whether they're a member of the upper class, ruling class, or not. Even Wafer, he was a worker, but he owned a home. The media is always siding with the cops and the white supremacist perpetrators. So the media will repeat the cop story and also aid in the murdering and the slandering of the black victim. So that's just a few of the similarities. And that's, I call that the playbook. In the book, it references like the blue wall of silence of the blue line, but it's really the white supremacist playbook.
It is.
This is what happened with Jordan Davis and his folks. We see how they put Trayvon on trial.
That's right.
You know, I've never gotten high. I've never smoked marijuana, but everybody who I've talked to who smoked marijuana says it either makes you sleepy or hungry. So when it comes to black people, we do things. Black people, we're super Negroes. We're superhuman.
Right.
We're able to do things no one else can. So in the history of marijuana, when nobody ever gets aggressive, they think that black people who have had marijuana are somewhat not aggressive. So Trayvon, they're wondering if the marijuana made him aggressive and made him attack George Zimmerman. Same thing about Renisha McBride. Maybe she was trying to break in. You know, we don't know what she was like under those circumstances, under the circumstances of being intoxicated. Really? Okay.
So I'd like to ask Tony, I was thinking about, this pattern of the dehumanization of the victim with Trayvon Martin's case, Jordan Davis, as you said, and Oscar Grant. But the comparison between possibly Renisha McBride's case and Rekia Boyd, the young woman who was murdered by the cop in Chicago, and he was also prosecuted. Do you see similarities in the
Has his case gone to trial yet?
Absolutely, he was prosecuted.
Well, I know he was charged.
That happened about.
I don't think it's gone to case.
It went to trial.
So what did he get?
He was found guilty.
He was found guilty.
Okay. All right.
He was found guilty.
I missed that because I wanted to go to that.
And so the way in which the trials of women who have been victimized and murdered
Well, see,
and the
because
way
I
that
didn't follow
males
that,
used
I
to-
don't know what happened.
Okay.
I don't know if Rakia Boyd was victimized. She shouldn't have been because she was a bystander.
She was sitting in,
She was minding her business and gets hit by a stray bullet by somebody who obviously should never have had a gun.
Right.
But usually, when it comes to black women, we're not afforded the protection of women. You know, the classic patriarchal line is that women are the weaker sex and are in need of protection from men. But when it comes to black women, there is no protection from the state.
Right.
And we're not allowed to defend ourselves or protect ourselves, such as with the case of Marissa Alexander.
You're not regarded as victims, but you're also not protected as the so-called weaker sex.
Exactly. And so, you know, the case clearly, you know, this is a 19-year-old sister who, it's not until we come into the last days of the trial that we start referring to her as a teenager. That's what she was, 19. You might be considered by the law as an adult at 18, but I doubt most of our mamas and daddies said we could do what the hell we wanted to do when we was 19, especially if we was living at home.
She would have been a teenager if she'd have been a white girl.
Well, innocent.
She'd have been an innocent teenager.
Innocent teenager. So, yeah, regardless of our age as black women, we're not afforded the status of victims, and we are not worthy of protection, and we are seen as being just as aggressive and menacing as black men are. Because as I argue in the book, you know, Oscar Grant, you know, it's about Renisha, but it's not about Renisha, it's about all of us. It was about Oscar, but it wasn't about Oscar, it's about all of us. Oscar wasn't picked because he was Oscar. He had on the right uniform that day, and that's what this is. Under white supremacy, we are all a threat because of this. So, white supremacy doesn't see gender. It sees a black menace.
In particular, I noticed, as we just referenced, that they were not thought of as youth, as teenagers.
Right.
You know, with Trayvon and even Jordan, that was the same issue with them. They even went as far as to go back into their school records and demonizing them for mistakes that generally most teenagers make. Were some of those things, did they discuss some of her
They wanted to enter that into court, but it was not allowed. Fortunately, it was not allowed.
That was good.
But she tried. The defense attorney tried like him.
She tried to put those put her pictures and everything from her cell phone, tweets and texts, all that. One of the things that goes with what you just said is there was recently, maybe a couple of months ago, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, a study that found that whites view blacks as about 10 years older than what they really are if they're charged with anything.
So a 3-year-old is 13.
So yeah, so if you're a teenager, in their view, you're a man, you know, a woman. You're, you know, so they don't see youth. It's harder for them to even see black people as youth, which is part of white supremacy. I mean, it's really a mental disease, you know.
It really is. And we, you know, when we say that, it's not a knee-jerk, pork chop nationalist, quote unquote, reaction. It's some type of psychosis or neurosis. That's what Toni Morrison calls it. You know, when they talk about they don't have the same empathy for black people. When they see black people in commercials, they don't identify. It's like this is something that's really is deep-seated and deep-seated when it comes to white folks and white supremacy, that's one of the reasons why I rail against white supremacy so much, is because regardless of the economic relationship, which has got to change because it's an exploitative and oppressive economic relationship living under capitalism, this psychological problem that white folks have is so tied with capitalism. It operates independent of capitalism. If capitalism was abolished tomorrow, we would still be in hell because of white supremacy. We'd be going through hell. And so we need to deal with this from the standpoint of it is a psychological issue, at the same time that we talk about the fact that we need to deal with the economic relationship, I think.
So in following both cases, and understanding, and as you just alluded to, the significance of black people and being up under oppression, what would you share with activist movement type folks, what you learned or didn't see as far as movement folks in dealing with police brutality?
I'm going to need you to ask me one more time.
Okay. In in regard to following both cases and looking at the oppression of black people, where does it fall in the larger scheme of the movement of folks being involved, holding down the court of dealing with police brutality, organizing the community? You know, like the Black Panther Party, you know, the premise of their birth was from police brutality. I mean, so we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years the upscaling of killing black people in regards to dealing with it as if it becomes a norm. You know, you go to court, you cry, you do visuals, hope the court do something, and then wait till it.
Well, we're putting all of our hopes, all of our eggs in the basket of legality and not policy, in legality. We're putting it all into the legal system, and that's got to change. You know, the Black Panther Party initially directly challenged the police. They directly challenged the police because it was legal, but then the laws changed. The laws are always going to change.
Right.
And we're going to need to understand that we have to support. A movement is an all-sided attempt. It's not just one particular thing. It's not just for legal. We're going to have to support a movement for freedom, and some of that's going to have to be illegal. What Harriet Tubman did was not legal, but thank God she did it. You know what I'm saying? The people who assisted her, that was illegal. Thank God they helped her.
Right.
So, you know, for example, and this is going to sound, I know this is going to sound rough, but just the idea of it is what I'm putting out there. Have y'all seen that video of that CHP officer beating that sister in California?
Yes.
All of those people who slowed down and watched her either videotape it. What if one of them had a gun?
Wow.
Now, I'm not saying pull the trigger.
I know. Right.
I'm simply putting it out there. How do you stop? We're not talking about on the back end with a lawsuit. And for those of us who say that the prison industrial complex must be abolished, you know, the only other alternative is he has to be fired and then criminally prosecuted. But you're against the prison industrial complex.
Right.
So then a lawsuit, but that's on the back end. How do you stop the brutalization at the point a person is being brutalized? The Black Panther Party got out and patrolled with their shotguns. And when they saw a black person pulled over by the police, they got out and watched. That means that they were prepared to use their weapons to intervene. Now what happened was the police took their focus off the person they was roughing up and put it on the Panthers.
Right.
And they would get into it. So, you know, we have to get to the point where we are truly tired of what's going on. We got Eric Garner just got choked to death. I just saw the other video of this sister who they have dragged out of the shower half naked. And they're telling her,
Could you tell us?
One of the people, I don't know why, one of the people is screaming, she's asthmatic. My mother, just like Eric Garner, you eventually see her slump to the floor.
Yep.
She didn't die, fortunately. But these police are acting like beasts in our community.
Yeah.
How do you deal with the beasts? Beasts have to be slain. That's all I know.
We were talking earlier
They
about
can't be
Eric
tamed.
Garner and the comparison to a brother who was murdered at Northland Mall for stealing a bracelet. And he was saying similarly, I can't breathe, and they, you know, and they murdered him.
This is why I mean police act like beasts. For a cop, for you to say to a cop, I can't breathe, the cop says, you're talking, you're breathing. There's no consideration whatsoever given to our humanity, let alone rights. Our humanity. So if you're dealing with a person who's supposed to be acting in a legal capacity, but they don't recognize your human right, what is the remedy for that? What is the remedy for that?
Wow.
I don't understand.
No humans involved. You know.
I like that you here in Detroit because, you know, when I always like to give a little historical context to what, you know, to what the present day reality for black people is in the world, particularly in America, but especially in the so-called Metro Detroit area. And so what you said earlier about black people are always viewed as the aggressor. They're never allowed to be, or never viewed as being the one that's being victimized. You know, so historically in Detroit, Detroit, of course, eventually becomes one of the centers of people seeking freedom from enslavement. Mm-hmm. So people make it to Detroit, and in a number of that became very explosive incidents. One in 1833, the women who led the liberation of a black couple, Thornton and Ruthie Blackburn, who made it from Kentucky to Detroit. Women led their freedom, got them to their freedom. One woman, Caroline French, and then the other, Tabitha Lightfoot. Mm-hmm. And Caroline French switches clothes with Ruthie Blackburn in jail. Mm-hmm. She goes to the jail, switches clothes with her, so that she gets Ruthie, who escaped from slavery, walks out of the jail. You know, we all look alike. So Ruthie walks out of jail free, and and they ferry her over to Canada. Mm-hmm. And Caroline, of course, after she makes sure that Ruthie is fully gone, she announces who she is. I'm free. You have to let me go. Mm-hmm. And as you said earlier, sometimes people have to be willing for freedom. For liberation, you have to be willing to break the law. So, of course, they were going to make Caroline take Ruthie's place in slavery. Mm-hmm. So when the sheriff walks out, the Wayne County Sheriff and the deputy and the two slave catchers walk out of the jail, they it's 800 black people surrounding the jail. Right. This is 1833. Mm. So they're willing to, they got swords, they got sticks, bricks, and some guns. Mm-hmm. In the melee, the sheriff gets killed. This is a story untold, mm-hmm. but it actually is a story that created the black community in Detroit. People don't even know this is how black people became a community in Detroit. Mm-hmm. So the sheriff gets killed, and Thornton, of course, escapes. They help him escape and make it to Toronto, make it to Canada. He ends up in Toronto with his wife. Mm-hmm. But black people from that point on realized they had to be intentional. Yeah. We had to be. We came together, spur of the moment, to save Thornton and Ruthie, mm-hmm. led by two women. Two women led this freedom movement, and so black people did this at spur of the moment. They said from this point on, we got to be intentional. We got to create a community. Of course, the backlash of that is that. They created a curfew for black people, the first curfew in Detroit. The idea of
people can't be trusted.
Can't come out after 9. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing they created was something that is known now as the Detroit Police Department.
In direct response to black people's presence, so law enforcement comes into being, or takes on a greater role.
Directly connected. And
in other words, we've been fighting police for a long time, long before black people. But I appreciate you bringing that story forward. I appreciate knowing that history. I need to know more about it. But the thing that struck me, other than the fact that it was two sisters, is creative resistance. Right. Yeah, it was illegal, but it was creative. Right. Because I'll be telling people, we would unarrest folks. Mm-hmm. When the slave catchers would catch somebody in the north, say they got one, people would come together and snatch that person out of their hands. Right. Not necessarily kill the slave catchers, in most cases but they thwarted their mission. Right. You know what I'm saying? So just like on that CHP video, another cop comes up and helps him subdue the woman so they can handcuff her. What if folks had jumped out and just knocked him off of her? Right? And just got her out of the way and took her wherever she needed to go. Wow. Creative resistance to what law enforcement is doing, because we operate on the assumption that, number one, law enforcement is operating legally, and number two, that they have the right to do what they're doing. And they get the right to do what they're doing through our consent. I don't remember giving them consent. I don't remember them sending me an email, a postcard, a phone call, stopping me at the grocery store, asking for my consent. As far as I'm concerned, they don't have it. So, but that goes back. That also goes into New African political science. We were not asked if we wanted to be citizens. We were told we're citizens. And at least it was at least 400,000. I was like, no, I'm not. In this very city, in Mario Bedela and his brothers. It was like, well, we're the descendants of those who said they ain't citizens. And we reiterate, we ain't citizens. But don't get me started on that history just yet.